Hello, and thank you for stopping by. If you are a subscriber, welcome back. If you are not a subscriber, please hit that subscribe button so you can be notified when new videos arrive. I've tried to do this video several times. I get started and I get flustered and jumbled because I'm having a hard time conveying what it is I'm thinking, and I don't really like to write things down. I will read from things that I have written down, but I don't really like to write stuff down ahead of time, and I have a very hard time remembering certain things. And the topic I wanted to talk about is voter suppression. And it started on, well, it actually started way before, but we basically took notice of it on November 3rd of 2020 when Donald Trump was trying to get a second term and Joe Biden was trying to get a first term and keep Donald Trump out of the second term. There were a lot of people that voted, more than normal, a lot of people that voted. Now, they talk about how the spikes and how Joe Biden had gotten tons and tons of spikes in the evening time or after the polls closed, and they couldn't explain why. I mean, they knew why, but they weren't willing to explain why. And the reason Joe Biden got all those spikes was because a load of people had sent in ballots through the mail. And the Republicans are pissed off about that. I think the Republicans are a little more angry that they listened to Donald Trump, and that's what cost them the election. Because Donald Trump was saying, don't send the ballots through the mail. If people had not listened to Donald Trump and sent the ballots through the mail, Donald Trump would have saw a large spike in ballots as well after the polls closed. And the reason I say that is because they set aside the ballots that are mailed in off to the side. They count all the ones that were brought in to the polling place first. They count them first, and then they have the ballots that were mailed in set off to the side. And that's when they count those, and Joe Biden had a lot of people send ballots in. But the Republicans are angry about that because it cost them the election. And a lot of people in rural areas that have no way to get to a polling place or that get to a mailbox fairly easily are a lot of minorities, African Americans, Mexicans, and Chinese and stuff like that. There's a lot of people that are living in areas where it's very difficult to get to, and the Republicans like that, and they want to try to do away with the mail-in ballots. Now, the reason I'm telling you all this is because there's a article that I got across on NPR. I saw it today, and I thought I would read you something from it. The reason I'm reading this is because it's very important, because the Supreme Court is starting to meddle in things they ought not meddle in. As Hagrid would say, you kids are meddling in things you ought not meddle in. So the Supreme Court seems ready to uphold restrictive voting laws. The U.S. Supreme Court seemed ready on Tuesday to uphold Arizona's restrictive voting laws, setting the stage for what happens in the coming months and years as Republican-dominated state legislatures seek to make voting more difficult. They want to make voting more difficult because if they make it more difficult, they think it's going to play into their hands. They think it's going to actually help them in the long run. It could turn around and bite them in the ass. Since the November election and President Trump's false claims that the balloting was rigged, Republican-run state legislatures have raced to pass new laws that would curb the modern-day expansion of the right to vote. Many of these laws likely to be challenged in court, and on Tuesday the Supreme Court heard arguments in cases that could set the parameters for which of these restrictive laws survive and which don't. So the Supreme Court heard this, and they're going to make a decision on which ones will survive and which ones will not survive. The Voting Rights Act, first passed in 1965, made it illegal for states to enact laws that resulted in voting discrimination based on race. That was back when blacks wanted the right to vote, and the South were saying, no, no, how dare you? How dare you want the right to vote? Let us white folks screw up everything for you. We've been doing it for a long time. We're getting pretty good at it. Why would you want to change that? The Votes Rights Act passed in 65 made it illegal for states to enact laws that resulted in voting discrimination based on race. 8 years ago, the conservative court, by a 5-4 vote, gutted one of the two major parts of the law. Now, it is the other major section that is in the conservative court's crosshairs. Tuesday's case, which was yesterday, involved two Arizona laws. One bars the counting of provisional ballots cast in the wrong precinct, and the other bars the collection of absentee ballots by anyone other than a family member or caregiver. Now, if you live in an area where they don't have places to vote, and there's some out there's some places out there that you live in a spot where there's nowhere to vote, and you go to the nearest place that you know of that has something to vote, and that's what they were doing. They were voting that way. The Republicans want to say, shame, 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 shame on you. How dare you want to cast a ballot in the wrong area? It's not our fault that we don't have a spot in that area for you. We ran out of money. Okay, it says Tuesday's case involved two Arizona laws. One bars the counting of provisional ballots cast in the wrong precinct. The other bars the collection of absentee ballots by anyone other than a family member or caregiver, which means that you can't take your friend's ballot into, like if your friend can't get to cast their vote, you can't take their absentee ballot with you unless you are a family member or a caregiver. Now, in a way, I can kind of understand that. I really can. Because, you know, you do want to cut down on fraud or possible fraud. Now, every election has had fraud. I don't care who's running for president. I don't care who wins. Every single election in America's history has had a little bit of fraud. All the way back to Thomas Jefferson, helping his good friend win the presidency. You have somebody stuffing the ballot in their friend's favor or in their personal favor. But that doesn't mean that there's going to be enough fraud to help cinch the election. State Republicans and Republican National Committees argued that both laws are indeed to prevent fraud, but the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals disagreed. It found no record of ballot fraud, but it did find evidence that the two laws make voting more difficult for minorities who often live in a huge rural area without a nearby post office or mail route, which is true. Today's Supreme Court argument focused on what standard the court should use to determine whether these laws or others like them result in unconstitutional discrimination amongst minority voters. And the justices' questions, they appeared to be plucked straight from the headlines. Justice Ella Kagan on the liberal side of the court led off, quizzing the Republican lawyer Michael Carvin with a series of hypotheticals that sounded much like some of the laws proposed by the GOP since the November election, which Trump lost to Democrat Joe Biden. Suppose, Kagan said, that a state has long had 2 weeks of early voting, and then the state decides that it's going to get rid of Sunday voting. During those 2 weeks, and suppose the evidence is that black voters cast their ballots on Sundays 10 times more often than white voters, is that system equally open, she asked. Well, is it? I think it would be, replied Carvin, because Sunday is the day we traditionally close government offices. Kagan clearly found that answer wanting, since, as she observed, states don't usually have Sunday hours either, but they do for early voting, just as they have in the past for Sundays when black voters often go to the polls from church. Turning to another hypothetical, Kagan posited that a state says, we're going to have election day voting only, and it's going to be from 9 to 5. And there's plenty of evidence in the record that the voters of one race are 10 times more likely to work a job that wouldn't allow them to vote during that time period. Is that system equally open? Carvin said it would seem to be. Yeah. Kagan persisted. What about 9 to 3 or 10 to 4? These are all hypotheticals that have never existed in the real world, Carvin protested. To that, Kagan replied, it doesn't seem so fanciful to me. And it has. There's a lot of people that can't vote during the day. Their jobs will not allow them to take the day off. They cannot afford to take the day off and go vote, so they vote after hours. And some vote late. Conservative Justice Samuel Alito had similarly tough questions for the other side. Suppose, he said, that a state has a 2-week early voting period and minority groups claim that it should have been 60 days. Lawyer Jessica Amundsen, representing Arizona's Democratic Secretary of State, replied that such an expansion is not required by the Voting Rights Act. The act looks with suspicion on a measure that cuts back on previous voting rights, but it doesn't require a broad expansion. Oh, really? Alito followed up with a different hypothetical about how a ballot must be filled out. You have to fill in a little box to vote for a candidate, but some voters instead put a check mark next to the box, and it can be shown that there's a statistical disparity with respect to voters who don't actually fill in the box but make a check mark instead. Amundsen suggested that this hypothetical likely wouldn't wash either. You have to show that this is in fact imposing a discriminatory burden on the minority voter, a burden that it is not imposing on non-minority voters, she said. Chief Justice John Roberts and several others conservative justices pointed to a 2005 report issued by former President Jimmy Carter and former Secretary of State James Baker that cited ballot collection as representing a particular potential for fraud. Amundsen reiterated that there was no record of fraud in Arizona's absentee voter collection, but she said there is a record of racial animus by the legislatures who introduced a bill to ban the practice. So, it appears that people will do anything they can to make sure that their candidate doesn't lose next time. And I get it. I do. But if everybody's vote should be counted for, then it should be. And if you know a large area that maybe votes weird or comes in late or does absentee ballots, or they do not have a way to get to a voting booth, then you should accommodate them, because you're just assuming that they're going to vote for Democrat instead of Republican just because they're a minority. But As we have seen on YouTube, there is an awful lot of minorities that are backing Donald Trump. For whatever reason, I don't know, but they are jumping all over each other to try to get to the Trump watering trough. So, what do you think? Do you think the ballots are fair? Do you think that it's possible that they could be trying to suppress the voter registration and voters in minority and rural areas? If you do, put a comment down there in the comments below and give me an idea of what you're thinking. Also, if you have an idea for a video and you'd like to leave that in the comments, do so as well. There's no right or wrong answer here. We know what's right and we know what's wrong. Deep down, we do. Very few of us have no moral compass. And we usually carry our conscience in our brain. So, if you'd like to give my videos a like and a thumbs up, please do so. And also hit that subscribe button and the bell icon to get notifications for new videos when they arrive. I'm still trying to figure this out. 300 and some videos in. I'm not getting very many viewers and I'm not getting very many subscribers. If y'all are subscribers, I do appreciate you, but I would really appreciate you giving me some heads up on what would make my channel work better. I kind of want to keep it in this vein if I can help it, but I need to know what I can do that makes things better. I'm going to let you go on this note. Remember, make tomorrow better than yesterday by doing the very best we can today. Have a good day, America, and all points beyond.